Anyway, welcome back to another Pickled Unscripted. As always, I have the whiskey loving gentleman, Matt, the Pickled Dragon,
Yeah.
and I am Dracoya.
Hello, Dracoya. I've
Getting
got
back,
some
getting back from a run.
Grange Yeah,
What?
they some Grangestone here, some single malt Scotch whiskey.
Whiskey.
Yeah, instead of it's SKY, the SQY. Yeah, it's good, but it is the delicious. Ooh, it is good.
I like that.
So yeah,
I just got back from a run and we decided we had to do a video, so obviously I'm having my post-workout uh shake. It's very nutritious.
oh, yes, it's full of fruit.
Hmm.
Yes,
Vitamin C, it's important.
it is antioxidants. So the whole nine. Yes.
So, we have an interesting topic for you guys today. You might have heard somewhere in the rumor mill that a certain someone was retiring from WotC.
Yeah, Chris Perkins has retired. And, you know, say what you will about 5E or 4E or any of the different E's. Basically, he's been around basically since the time that WotC bought TSR, right?
Hmm.
Um, wasn't that like 97, something like that? He was with this company for 28 years. So, yeah, I mean, he was the lead designer, but eventually was promoted around the time that they laid off their entire publishing staff, all the people that arranged to have books printed and distributed and whatnot. And a lot of the other developers were shunted off and laid off. But Chris, he was promoted to some honcho-esque position, no longer a game developer. Well, now he has ridden off into the sunset. I think, it's kind of a bittersweet thing because no, whether you like 5E, whether you hate 5E or hate WotC or whatever, he's a good game developer, you know. And he obviously always had to work within the constraints of the goals of Wizard of the Coast and whatnot. So,
What can you do?
yeah, what can you do? But you can't deny that he was an impactful force in the TTRPG scene. And generally a nice guy, Um, but I I I I feel in my heart of hearts that this is a very bittersweet moment because I've said it for a couple of years now, I think. Hasbro has a bad habit of taking beloved IPs, and once they stop producing, um, they don't try to revitalize, they just sit on them.
Right.
And D&D has always been this kind of living, breathing thing. Once it started kind of losing steam, they would launch a new edition and breathe new life into it. Obviously the current cycle is not quite the same thing because they're trying to turn this cultural phenomenon into just some mobile game, which soulless.
But they're not even doing that, and they're not even doing that well. I
Yeah.
mean, the idea of a virtual tabletop, I think, could be fun. Yeah, no, it doesn't replace the in-person magic, obviously. But if I have to play with, my friend that's in Texas and another friend that's in Cali and another friend that's in DC and another friend that's in Spain, there's really no way to go about it unless it's virtual. So the idea that it was this virtual reality, I don't know, I thought that was pretty cool. But they didn't even do that right. And I feel like that would have been the easiest thing.
Well, and all accounts following the 90% layoff of the VTT staff, all accounts were that they had kind of given up on it early. Like, um, and it was never going to be what they claimed it would be after a few stumbling over a few hurdles. But it just looks bleaker and bleaker for Dungeons and Dragons. And again, I am somebody who uh has a love of things that have this long legacy. I'm a baseball fan, has going back so far. And D&D is one of those things, it goes back and has a history, and it was a living and breathing thing, more so than any other game I've ever been, associated or had the pleasure
In
of
love
playing.
with.
Because, we part of the enigma, or the what makes D&D special is the um it's an undefinable element, because we all create our own worlds, we create our own fun, we create our own D&D, um, that are based around a loose set of rules that we're allowed to change and play with all we want. And so D&D is different depending on what house you're in, what group you're around. And I think that's something that's very special. And I definitely feel like Hasbro miscalculated when they thought they could turn it into a mobile game, you know,
Yeah.
because at that point you kind of it ripped the soul out of D&D.
So you know what I'm finding from a business perspective that I've been seeing a lot lately is that there are businesses like mom and pop shops and hobby stores even. They'll buy things because they're popular, but they don't really know their product. And when you don't really know your product, but you're just buying it because it's popular and you think it'll sell, the stores don't really do as well because somebody needs to have a certain level of knowledge, certain level of passion, and WotC just doesn't have that. It was clearly bought by a bunch of executives that thought that it would sell well, but they didn't have even the most fundamental understanding of what Dungeons and Dragons really means.
Yeah, and that is I think that is something that some of the insiders were saying, some of the employees of WotC who were releasing internal documents based on right after the 90% of the VTT crowd was released. And that was that these Microsoft execs, though they claim to play D&D, I remember Chris Cox said he plays D&D dozens of times, hundreds of people or whatever. It was some crazy number that I was skeptical of. Um, but these are video game people that they brought in to, you know, steward the game, and they did it poorly. And people like Chris Perkins, I'm sure he's always going to say, be positive. He doesn't want to go out on a negative. He spent almost 30 years at the company. But his tweet to me was like a little bit. It almost seemed like it was too positive. Um, so when
I
he
mean,
so when he
I
said, yeah, with D&D's 50th anniversary wrapping up and the revised rule books doing gangbusters, this is the perfect fairy tale ending for me. So like that line of rule books doing gangbusters, I like, after so much evidence has come out to the contrary, it's almost kind of like, is he kind of on the way out, alluding to, there's something foul in the fridge.
I I think that first of all, I think he's being very sarcastic, I think. And second of all, I think that there is a point where you hear bad news so much and your luck is just so crappy that you can't help but smile and laugh because it's just so unfortunate and so terrible that it's almost freaking hilarious. And I feel like maybe that's the vibe I get from his post.
Yeah, it's like, you know, Chris Perkins being one of the more visible members of not WotC, but of D&D. Uh,
Hmm.
you know, him, his leaving on the, right on the heels of the other layoffs. It almost feels like, you know, D&D is this fallen warrior in a battlefield, and there's like these vultures ripping chunks of flesh out of it. And there goes Chris, he's like those latest piece of flesh to get ripped out. Um, I think like Jacoy, you mentioned earlier, maybe he had a situation where it was like this had been planned all along, but since he was so instrumental in the development of the game, and since he had been there for so long, they kind of gave him more of a graceful out, rather than just, kind of laying him off. Uh, but you know, it definitely feel like it's kind of melancholy to me. And I know like there are the OSR guys out there. There's the bro SR guys. There's all of the different factions of the D&D, the 1E guys and the 2E guys, and and there's all the faction wars and everything. And I think that is part of what makes the game so interesting to me. Is that uh they it isn't one game. It is many different games, and so much, and a very different thing to each and every person. But we all still just call it Dungeons and Dragons, which I think is really cool. Uh, but yeah, I don't know. What do you guys think?
It's kind of sad. It does feel like it's the end of an era.
A little bit, and I don't know if it really has anything to do with Chris Perkins per se, as it is this, the symbolism of somebody. If he's been there since '97, that '97 was we were still playing 2E. 3E didn't come for another year or two after that, or three, and so yeah, I mean, it's kind of like it spans quite a long legacy of gaming there. So
Yeah.
I don't know. Sad days.
What do
Sad
you
days.
guys think?
Yeah.
Comment, like, subscribe. Tell us your thoughts. Tell us if we just need to take a break and maybe we're reading too much into this.
Yeah. Maybe we're being too dramatic.
Maybe we are being too dramatic. Maybe we just need to drink more. What do you guys think?
Yes. We always need to do that though. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
all right. Thanks, everybody. Please come on back.
And have another round on us.
Woohoo.